not fair. Tom had promised me a full hour. He'd speak a full hour in the insurance industry just to warm me up. Thank you very much for having me here. The opportunity to speak on, I think this is, Andrea, your inaugural. So this is great. I've known Andrea for a long time. I don't have to, since we were kids, so this is a treat. Now, I know that this speech was originally billed as a discussion of our 2018 budget, which we announced a week ago today. But, well, two things. First, the budget has been fairly well received, and I don't know if I've got a lot to add there in the sales department on the budget. I know some of you do have concerns about another year of federal deficits, but I am a big believer in the debt to GDP ratio, which is in fine shape. In fact, we're the best in the G7, and Canadians did make a clear choice between making investments in the economy and in society and a balanced budget to the sake of all else. And frankly, a speech that convinces you that debt to GDP is a better metric than an annual deficit will probably put all but two of you to sleep, so I'm going to avoid that. Second, I was struggling all weekend with my notes on this. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there's just something about a speech that only addressed the federal budget. I guess if I had to put a word on it, I'd pick disingenuous. I mean, we all know what's going on. We all know the state of the finances of this province. So as much as this is going to drive my staff half-cracked, I'm going to venture a little bit beyond the script today. To discuss matters, I can hear them now. I used to be that person when Tobin would do this to me, so I'm kind of sweetly enjoying this. But I want to discuss matters that I think are important to everybody in this room. Before we get down to the nitty-gritty, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of my fellow MPs from this province. There's only 7 of us, but I think it's fair to say that we have a disproportionate impact in the caucus. Every Tuesday night, we meet to strategize for Atlantic Caucus the next morning, where we meet to strategize for the National Caucus that follows Atlantic Caucus. And listen, do not undervalue your backbench MP having the opportunity to speak every week with each cabinet minister and the Prime Minister. The conversations are behind closed doors. You can't hear them from here. But trust me, they are far from quiet. Because there is nothing quiet about Yvonne Jones. There is nothing quiet about Nick Whalen, or Goody Hutchings, or Scott Sims, or Ken MacDonald, or Terence Rogers. That's my team. That's your team in Ottawa. So, whether it's working with them or working with Bev and Marcy and Jeff during my 10 years on Canada AM, I've always been able to do my best work when I was part of a team with a clear and shared goal. And our goal here is simple, and it's one held closely to our hearts. That goal is to ensure that the people of this province have their voices heard. And when decisions are made that involve this province, its well-being, its future, trust me, your voices are heard. We share a common goal, but we also share a considered approach. We don't need any more ranting or roaring. We'll leave that for on deck and below. Ranting and roaring for the sake of doing it does not foster positive working relationships. It doesn't bring about positive change. It does not grow the economy. Simply put, the job of an MP is to get stuff done. It is not to sell ink for newspapers, and it's not to get likes on Instagram. Effective representation for this province, in my books, relies on persuasion, not drama. I've had enough time on television, thank you very much. And let me assure you that when and where it matters most, Yvonne, Scott, Ken, Nick, Goody, and Chorence are the most persuasive people in Ottawa. So with that said, let me talk a little bit about our recent budget. Now, as a student of public policy, it's kind of how I always hoped a budget process would work. It's certainly how the Prime Minister is determined that it will work. So, like I said, every Tuesday morning, all Tuesday evening, I should say, all 7 of us meet and we determine the priorities for the province for that week. The next morning at 8:15 a.m., all the Atlantic MPs meet and we determine our priorities for the region. And at 10 a.m. until noon, all government MPs meet for National Caucus, which is held in a beautiful, auspicious room in the centre block of Parliament. And all cabinet ministers are there. The Prime Minister presides, mandatory attendance, no staff. Every Wednesday morning, speak your mind, make your case, defend it, fight for it, rant, roar, win some, lose some, but behind closed doors, a united front, and no snot nor bowel. The budget truly is a product of that room. It's where a national budget is refined to deliver local change, local growth, and a lot of those local changes and a lot of that local growth is going to happen right here in this province. As an example, we have dedicated $250 million to small craft harbor improvements. I love it when Goody smiles. When you factor in that 37% of small craft harbors are in this province, you can see the impact that it'll have here in Newfoundland and Labrador. It means improvements for small craft fishermen in landing their catch, but it's also a vote of confidence for our rural communities. Now, you might think that trumpeting our small craft harbor investments is a strange starting point, but for many communities in this province, the wharf is the hub of the community. And this budget focused on making tailored investments for our communities. So for me, the wharf is a natural starting point. Beyond wharves, Budget 2018 enacts an advisory council on the implementation of a national pharmacare strategy. It strengthens airports that serve remote communities like Wabush. It increases supports to low-income workers, putting more money in their pockets while encouraging labor force participation. It provides $48 million to ACOA, including $8 million focused on supporting women entrepreneurs. It makes substantial improvements to our employment insurance program, and it continues our policy of making targeted investments in Canadian competitiveness. Those targeted investments are one of the key strategies of our government as we strive to build and strengthen our middle class. And as a particular note among those targeted investments is our national supercluster strategy, and especially for us, the Oceans Supercluster. So we're all on the same page. The Ocean Supercluster is a private sector-led partnership that brings companies together in new collaborations to boost innovation, modernization, and development in our ocean industries. Companies will co-invest to adopt and commercialize technology to solve their shared challenges. It will develop talent, it will improve supply chains, and support startups to build our entrepreneurial ecosystem. See, that's a lot. I need to have a glass of water. Sometimes, you know, in my job, you read a couple of sentences like that, and it all starts running together. Anyway, to boil it down, this is a big deal. We are talking over $150 million in private sector investment in ocean industries in Atlantic Canada, matched dollar for dollar by the federal government. This is industry-led, and industry has significant skin in the game. And half of that investment comes from this province, for this province. Oil and gas, fishery, aquaculture, new technologies. We have been living on the hard edge of the North Atlantic for some time now. And if I can borrow a phrase from the US Marines, we've learned to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Guess what? There's money in that. There's money in taking our common sense, our know-how, and putting it on the market. Just look at the tier Kraken's been on in the last couple of months, or Rudder for the last 15 years. And when you realize that they're just the tip of the spear, that there are dozens of other companies with technical expertise and some solid can-do attitude, waiting to take their own place on the world stage, you realize that the federal government has an obligation, a duty to develop that, to foster that, to help those organizations take the next step. Atlantic Canada is a globe beater in ocean sciences, ocean development, ocean tech. The world comes to us for solutions, for our skills, for our talent. We need to build this here to compete with the world and to thrive here at home, to create the hundreds of companies and thousands of jobs that will stay here so we can prosper here, surrounded by some of the roughest waters and most miserable weather in the world. Because this is where we live. This is who we are. It's what we do. But the Ocean Supercluster is substantially broader in scope than a super incubator or a super investment regime. It's designed to encourage collaboration, to foster the pollination of ideas across areas of expertise, to take the lessons learned from Silicon Valley and in Dublin and at Cambridge University, two places where I've studied and I know very well, and to make Atlantic Canada the ocean center of excellence to the world. To take engineers and sit them down with biologists and economists and geoscientists and fishermen, allowing their individual expertise to combine and form something greater than the whole. Our investment is bold, it is substantive, it is transformative. But we also know that transformative research needs to have a clear pathway towards commercialization. Simply put, if you can't get something to market within a reasonable amount of time, someone else is going to eat your lunch. So as a government, we've recognized that it's our responsibility to create a regulatory environment that attracts and encourages investment. That's where our recent change to environmental assessments of our offshore oil and gas projects will play a key role. We knew that we needed a clear national pathway for assessments and approvals. We also knew that certain sectors and certain regions possessed unique knowledge and expertise that we could rely on. Finally, we knew that duplication destroys value and it discourages investment. What we achieved was a regulatory framework that is effective across the country while promoting the specialized expertise of organizations like the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission or the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board. I've said it before. Once a regional assessment has been completed, it is our intent to have the CNLOPB handle all exploratory wells. We expect royal assent on our bill within 11 months. We will work with the province to have the regional assessment completed within that time frame, which means that all those consultations for exploratory wells that you hear about will be done in one shot. That's it. In fact, work has already begun so that the regional assessment is conducted concurrently with the legislation, slowly but effectively making its way through the House of Commons, so there is absolutely no delay in enacting this new process. Once in place, this new process will have shorter time frames. It'll make it a lot harder to stop the clock. It will bring certainty, it will bring predictability to the decisions that are being made. And the new agency to be created, replacing the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, will for the first time have an office here in St. John's. This is where Canada's offshore oil and gas industry is located. And as I've told my colleagues in government, you can't have a seat at the table if you're not in the same city as the table. Now, if I had a nickel for every time I've heard that the devil is in the details over the last month and a bit, I'd give it to the Premier and it would put a keen dent in that deficit. But they're right. Some of the details in this process have yet to be ironed out because they're going to be done by regulation. And you can't have regulation until you pass the legislation. But whatever uncertainties may remain in the regulations that roll out, they will be far fewer in number and far fewer in scale than the uncertainties legislated by the Harper government. This is a case of your 7 MPs hearing from industry, hearing from the province, making the case to Cabinet, making the case to the Prime Minister, and getting it done. We are delivering on what this industry needs to succeed in the global marketplace. We know this is a highly competitive international industry, but we also know we're good at it. So we will continue to deliver. On that you have my word. I love this map. It's how I see the world. It's how I think you should see the world. And history reminds us that for hundreds of years, we were at the center of the world. St. John's was one of the most important free ports in the earliest days of the British Empire. Some 15,000 fishermen back in the day, all around the world, selling for cash or bartering for fish and oil. We had the resources. We had, as they say in real estate, location, location, location. And given the opportunity to compete, we had few equals. That's why our government committed almost $25 million to enhance and extend high-speed internet service in rural and remote parts of the province. It's the same way we build highways or airports or wharves and any other infrastructure that allows for economic and social development, because given the opportunity to compete, we have few equals. And those opportunities will now come in abundance. CETA now gives Newfoundland and Labrador greater access to the 500 million plus European market than Switzerland. The CTPPP will soon open up Asian markets to us, especially for our fishery. And companies like OCI are making their presence felt. They're going abroad. They're attracting new customers willing to pay more for a high-quality product. At the same time, our tourist ads draw visitors here, calling this place the very edge of the earth. Just the other week, I spoke with Hospitality Newfoundland and Labrador. Their theme was Pathways to Profit, and let me tell you, the profitable tourism operators may see us on the very edge of the earth, but they don't consider themselves stuck on the arse end of Canada. They realize that we sit in the middle of the richest nations the world has ever seen. And we've got a tourism product that can't be replicated anywhere else. It is a ripe opportunity and one that our government has been proud to support. Last spring, we launched Canada's new tourism vision. By 2021, we want to grow the number of international travelers spending the night in Canada by 30%. By 2025, we want Canada to be one of the top 10 visited countries in the world. More particularly, we want to double the number of tourists from China from last year's 668,000 to over 1.2 million per year. Now you might say, why China? Simple answer is, they spend more than any other international tourist when they go on vacation. And incidentally, in November of this year, I'm headed to Beijing as part of the Atlantic Growth Strategy, spending a week on the ground there to foster commercial relations with our region. The Atlantic Growth Strategy is an unprecedented collaboration between the 4 Atlantic provinces and the federal government. Last year, we committed to a joint investment of more than $24 million to help make this region a top tourism destination. ACOA has invested more than $6 million in 36 tourism-related business projects in this province. And we know these initiatives are working. Last year was a record year for our province, with 550,000 people and spending almost $575 million. And last year, Stats Canada announced that last month, Stats Canada announced that last year was a record year for the Canadian tourism market. 20.8 million visitors to Canada, up 4.4%, besting our previous record of 20.1 million in 2002. So all that to say, our government knows the importance of tourism to the financial well-being of the country, the region, and of this province. Not only that, but we're making the key investments needed to support this sector, giving operators the tools to grow their business while we help grow the market. Okay, so that's the advertised business out of the way. So if you just came for the budget update, that's all I got for you. The sound political advice at a moment like this is to stick to the talking points on the budget that they give you and that have been fairly well received. Maybe court a little controversy by noting that the amendments to our government's proposals on Canadian-controlled private corporations, how voices like the Board of Trade were heard and were incorporated into those changes. And I know that that would be sound political advice because I can actually hear the furrowed brow of Ken Carter right over there as I'm about to embark on something that we hadn't drafted. These are strange times, though, and moments like this are important. In 1867, when Canada was being founded, the scope of authority for the federal and provincial governments were clearly enshrined in sections 91 and 92 of the Constitution. And so I enter into this conversation knowing that the powers of the federal government are limited in relation to provincial finances. I enter into this conversation knowing that even as a federal cabinet minister, there are few direct changes that I can enact. And all that said, after CBC's article on provincial bankruptcy last week, and all the talk on Open Line every morning, I don't know, but I have any choice but to talk about the state of our provincial affairs. So let's get on with it. First problem, our population is shrinking while aging at an incredible rate, which means that the tax base is shrinking. Second problem, by all objective measures, we have a structural deficit that is going to worsen as that tax base shrinks. Third problem, vested parties seem more interested in trading barbs in the media than assessing options to address problems 1 and 2. Now, I don't think that the first and second problems are up for any serious debate. There seems to be an accepted fact, or accepted as fact, by reasonable people across the political and economic spectrum. I know it. You know it. The unions know it. The Premier knows it. And it seems, based on the recent Abacus data polling, the people of this province know it too. So, for the first time in a long time, we've got a general consensus on the existence, scope, and significance of the problem. But what we lack is a consensus on the proper course of action. Now, that is not to say I disagree with the way forward proposed by Premier Ball, far from it. I think that the fundamental difficulty is that he's got Goldilocks as a house guest. Any set of proposals seems to be met with the response that it's either too hard or too soft. And with that divide, with that inability to demonstrate unity, we are left with uncertainty. Groups like this board suggest our public sector payroll is too high. Organized labor says that employment can't be cut in the public sector without impacting service delivery. And you know what? They're both right. But in our new reality, maybe it's time to realize that perhaps our problem isn't so much expenditure as it is expectation. We need to wrestle with having become accustomed to benefits and services that are now unsustainable. That expectation manifests itself in any number of ways: healthcare, roads, ferries, schools. But each time we ask for more, it is generally a public sector employee who is expected to provide. Vilifying labor, painting them as greedy and self-interested, ignores the demand that created the employment position in the first place. We know something's got to be done, but instead of taking action, we seem to be turning on one another. Our Constitution wasn't the only thing that happened in 1867. That year, off the coast of Spotted Island, Labrador, my great-great-grandfather, Captain William Jackman, single-handedly saved 27 lives. While he was on the shore during a gale, he saw a vessel in distress run aground. So he did what he had to do. He dove into the Labrador Sea and he swam to the boat. He brought 11 people ashore, one at a time, on his back. And when he was too tired to swim, he tied himself off with a rope and went back out for 16 more people, again, one at a time. There was no loss of life. He saved every single person aboard that boat. If you ran the numbers on that, if you calculated the odds of a single man rescuing anyone by diving into the frigid waters of the Labrador Sea and surviving, you'd stay ashore. But my great-great-grandfather was a proud man who probably couldn't live with himself if he had to watch 27 people drown. He preferred the uncertain outcome of an attempted rescue over the certainty of inaction. He didn't dither. He didn't linger. He fought. He fought the current. As a captain, as a fisherman, he knew that action was necessary. He knew that he needed to fight the Labrador Sea. And guess what? He got a stamp out of it. That's real. I'm a proud Newfoundlander, and I'm a proud Labradorian. I'm a full-blooded townie who grew up in Goose Bay. There's not many of us. And while the safe play is to politically stay ashore while this situation unfolds, I just can't bring myself to do that. Other nations have been in similar positions before, so let me take a minute to tell you about the Irish Social Partnership. It's something that I studied while on a Rotary scholarship at University College Dublin, sponsored by the Rotary Clubs of St. John's and Happy Valley Goose Bay. In 1987, Ireland realized that if they were going to combat weak economic growth, outmigration, and unsustainable government debt, then business, labor, and government would have to come together. They formed the Irish Social Partnership. Now, newspaper columnists today would attribute the Celtic Tiger to lower corporate taxes. That's part of it, but it's a smaller part of it. If you ask the Irish, and I have, they'll tell you that the partnership was what made their economy roar. I mentioned earlier that as a federal cabinet minister, I don't have much power to have a direct impact on provincial finances, but I do have a very big boardroom table at my disposal. And drawing on the experience of the Irish, it is my intention to bring together labor and business and government in this province to talk meaningfully about the future, to step away from the abyss, and to find our way out of this. Because I believe that doom is not inevitable, and that there exists the opportunity for our province to succeed and to thrive, but we gotta take bold action, and we got to strike out in new directions, which brings me to immigration. A few moments ago, I mentioned the Abacus poll, and a lot of it focused on how we all expect the province to do over the next few years. Not exactly an uplifting read. But one thing really caught my eye. Almost half the province thinks that our residents are equally or even more diverse than the rest of Canada. We think we're more diverse than Toronto. I mean, growing up for me, diversity was Protestants. I'm a West End townie, so that's, but when you look at the actual numbers, roughly 22% of Canadians were actually born in another country. That's the national average, 22%. And in this province, it's 2.4. But see, I think that's great because it sounds like people don't want to be left out of this party. The good news is that even though our population isn't all that diverse, this is considered one of the most open cities in Canada by immigrants, if you ask them. Once people come here, they are welcomed into our communities. They are welcomed into our homes. They're often welcomed into our hearts. I've seen it twice. Come from away is not some over-sweetened stereotype. On Broadway, our Prime Minister hosted every ambassador to the UN to a showing of Come From Away. He hosted Ivanka Trump. And he said, "This is us." Standing with 1,000 other Newfoundlanders and Labradorians around the mosque on Logie Bay Road last year, I thought, this is us. Getting married here 8 years ago to my husband, a Greek Montrealer, and having a Jiffy cab driver turn around to the two of us and say, "Boz, I don't give a fuck." This is us, that's what he's saying. That happened 5 times. I almost started crying the first time. Steve didn't quite get it. By the 5th time he got it. He knew what he was saying. But the best was one fella actually turned around because he got it, right? He got how we might be viewed by other people. He actually turned around, looked me in the eye and said, "Seamus, if you got married in Toronto, we would have fucking killed you." That's true. That's true. He knew. He knew what we're really like. So it stands to reason with a reception like that awaiting them, people want to choose this province. Now, the provincial government has set an immigration target of 1,700 people, and that is a big jump over our immigration numbers of the past. But if you want to offset our aging population and outmigration, we need a minimum of 4,000 new immigrants in this province. A minimum of 4,000 new immigrants a year just to maintain the status quo. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in maintaining the status quo. I'm interested in growing this economy. I'm interested in more jobs, in higher profits, in increased prosperity, and that means more immigrants, a lot more. I could make the argument that bringing more immigrants to Newfoundland and Labrador is the right and compassionate thing to do, and I'd be inclined to. My grandfather came here as a refugee from Ireland after the Anglo-Irish War and the Irish Civil War, at a time when Dublin looked like Aleppo, Syria, and no one was interested in taking in an Irishman. Nothing but trouble. But the Dominion of Newfoundland did. And I'd like to think that turned out pretty well for my family and me. No, I want you to support new immigrants out of pure selfishness. Because they don't take our jobs, they create them. Immigrants send more of their children to college and university. They use less social services than we do. And they are far more likely to start their own businesses and create jobs than we are. It's a fact. 45% of new businesses at Munn's Genesis Centre founded by immigrants right now. Hey Orca is a new company founded by some international students who graduated from Memorial, and they decided to stay. Now, according to their site, Hey Orca makes social media planning for agencies easy. And I have no idea what that means. But I do know they hired 30 people over the last 2 years, and that 90% of their market is in the US, and they are up on Kenmount Road. I may not know what they're at, but I want more of them. And I want them all around this province. 4,000 new immigrants should be the baseline. And it's more than double where the current figure sits, but that is my challenge to you. We need you on board with this, and I know you're hungry for it. I was just on the phone yesterday with my friend, Somali refugee turned immigration minister, Ahmed Hussein, and we are ready to make this happen. We can match the skills to your businesses, we can fast-track candidates, we can allow for whole families. Because when whole families come here, and the spouse is working here, and the kids are in school here, then it is far more likely that they'll stay here. Because people like us. Because we value hard work. Because we value loyalty to people, and because we value loyalty to place. Because we need more customers. Because we need more taxpayers, and also because we need more neighbors, more good neighbors. And you know why? Because we got the room for it. Because this is a time for boldness, for seizing opportunities that present themselves on the global stage. And there are countless examples of innovation and renewal at our fingertips. Look, I am sure I'm not alone when I thought what Zita Cobb was up to was cracked, like she was cracked. Or thought that they would never eat whatever it is that Jeremy Charles puts on a piece of birch bark down at Raymond's. What is he doing? And you'd certainly never catch any of us strapping ourselves to a zip line in Petty Harbour or Steadybrook. And I'll be honest, it blows my mind that the Fancy Inn by Mallard Cottage uses Hawkins cheesies as a bedside snack. Not only that, but Todd Perrin's crazy enough to put matches in the bathroom at his restaurant. Now, I know there are far grander examples of packaging our traditions in a modern way, but I'm struggling to think of one more on point than Hawkins cheesies and bathroom matches. And that's just hospitality and tourism. We need to take the example of the innovators we have in our province, and we need to apply their know-how. We need to apply their thought processes to how we act as people, how we act as a province. Our PALs, our Verofins, our Rudders, our Fortises, our Solaces, our Sequence Bios, these people know how to lead large-scale change I said before that effective representation relies on persuasion, not drama. I want us to come together to persuade each other about the proper course for this province. The people who elected a provincial government are the same people who send 7 MPs to Ottawa, and they expect us to get stuff done. The Newfoundland and Labrador social-economic partnership will be built on the foundation of informed discussion, not ranting, not roaring. These are uncertain times. And this is an uncertain world. It feels uncertain. I understand better than most about the anxiety that comes hand in hand with uncertainty. After I left Canada AM, it near did me in. And I feel as much for the small business owner who wonders whether they can keep the lights on as I do for the government employee who wonders whether their neck is next on the block. But I fought myself to be here. I have no illusions about the gravity of the situation we are in, the enormity of the problems we face, or the resilience of our people in the face of adversity. So I say we fight because we have to, because we're worth it, because despite the wind, despite the current, despite the cold, despite the economic hardship and the too often difficult job of keeping the wolves from the door, we always have a cup of sugar or a cord of wood for the new neighbor down the way. And that is worth fighting for. So let's get on with it. Thank you.